Good morning. Today is Sunday, November 14th, 2021. I would like to know more about Israeli politics than I do know, especially about the people who are not as well known, at least to me, and I try to learn a little bit more about them. Last week, there was a fascinating interview with Matan Kahana. It was published in Times of Israel. He has been quite visible recently, since the beginning of this government about 5 months ago. I've never met him. Before this year, I had never read anything about him. And I only know what I read and hear. And what I know so far is fascinating. In this new government, he is the Minister of Religious Services. He's received the most publicity over the last few months for successfully overhauling the system of kashrut in Israel, which now allows for other groups other than the Rabbanut to officially offer kosher supervision, but under the guidelines, under the rubric of the Rabbanut, the Chief Rabbi's office. And his next project is to transform the process of gerut, conversion in Israel. He also wants to lower the age from 24 to 21 for Haredim who avoid army service to legally enter the workforce. Currently it's at 24. He wants to lower it to 21. So first, tells you a lot about an Israeli politician. Let's listen to what the Haredi politicians are saying about him. In Knesset, over the last number of months, repeatedly, he has been called Antiochus, Haman. I guess it depends. Before Hanukkah, he's called Antiochus. Before Purim, he's called Haman, I guess. There have been demonstrations outside of his home. You'll excuse me for smiling because it's not funny. It's terrible, but it is also so ridiculous that it is. So the demonstrations outside of his home feature Haredim demonstrating against him with shrimp. So they bring shrimp outside his home. And I ask you to excuse me for using a derogatory term in public, but he has been called the absolute worst term that a Haredi politician can use in Israel. He has been called a Reform Jew. God forbid. So, in fact, though, Matan Kahana is a Shomer Shabbat, Shomer Kashrut, observant, dati, davens 3 times a day, wears tzitzis, from person. And it's fascinating that, in a sense, a religious person, a true Yarei Shamayim, who observes mitzvos, is more of an insult and more of a problem, catastrophe for the Haredi world than simply someone who is not traditional in their lifestyle to begin with. Kahana comes from a very interesting background. He served in the IDF in Sayeret Matkal, which is one of Israel's most elite army units. Then, when he finished that, he entered the Air Force and became an IDF pilot. People assumed that if he was going to enter politics, like other people who had been through Tzahal, that he would want to focus on defense. But he said, I wanted to be the minister of religious services, and I've worked on this for the last 2 years. And that's because I believe that the biggest rift among the Jews in the state of Israel stems from the issues of religion and state, and someone like me can actually tackle those issues. At the beginning of this new government, about 5 months ago, you may remember there was a Knesset debate that preceded the swearing in of this new government, this unprecedented government that somehow, as unlikely as it sounds, is still in power and stable for the time being. And you may remember we discussed this at the time, that the Haredi parties at the time were speaking so disparagingly of Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, also a Shomer Shabbos, Dati, frum person. And they were talking about his new coalition as anti-Jewish, as wicked. It would destroy the Jewish nature of Israel. Okay, allowing for the hyperbole of Israeli politicians in general, and Haredi Israeli politicians in particular, even for them, it was over the top. We discussed this at the time. But listen to what Matan Kahana said in Knesset in response. He said to them, speaking in Knesset, speaking to the Haredi politicians, he said, who are you to teach us about Yirat Hashem, fear of heaven? Who are you to lecture us about sanctifying God's name? You should be ashamed of yourselves. Your behavior is the worst imaginable Chilul Hashem, desecration of God's name. When did you ever pray the Amidah while lying in an IDF ambush in the pouring rain and bitter cold? When did you ever pray to God before going into battle? That is a statement that gets at the heart of the division between the Haredi world and the Dati Leumi, the religious Zionist world, the modern Orthodox world, the world that I'm privileged to consider myself a part of. When did you ever pray to God before going into battle? How is it possible that individuals can help to lead the country if they're not also helping to defend it? The irony of that is just overwhelming. And Matan Kahana expressed it in the most clear manner possible. So he has a fascinating perspective on the evolution of modern Israeli society, just the opposite of what a lot of people think. And that is, for 73 years, he says, since the establishment of the state, the status quo agreement, now that's the agreement that was originally made between Ben Gurion and the Haredi community in order to oversee those aspects of the Jewish nature of the new state of Israel. For 73 years, that war has been waged primarily by the Haredim. And yet, under their watch, we have seen the dilution of Israel's Jewish identity. Israel's religious identity has been in constant decline over these 73 years. If you look, for example, at public Shabbat observance, which near the beginning of the state, there was almost no such thing. Stores open on Shabbat? Almost never. Entertainment open on Shabbat? Almost never. And now, after 73 years of Haredi control of religious services, stores are open, entertainment is open, shopping is open. Shabbos is less special today after 73 years of Haredim overseeing the Jewish nature of Israel than it was at the beginning. And here is his fundamental conclusion, and I agree with this so strongly. I've shared this with you before. His fundamental conclusion is, the more there is an effort to coerce people, the more they run in the opposite direction. Coercive legislation, forcing people against their will, imposing things that the rest of the community is not willing to accept, the more they run in the opposite direction. By contrast, he points out, where there isn't coercion, there's a strengthening of Jewish identity. If you look at Israel today, not within the political realm, but for example, within the cultural realm, the music, in so many other areas of life, more and more people are seeking to connect to Jewish tradition. And what he says, in taking control of the religious nature of Israel away from Haredim and into the hands of Dati Leumi, modern Orthodox Jewry, I want to strengthen the state's Jewish identity. We've established a safe refuge for the Jewish people. Now we have to move to the next stage, building up the state of Israel's Jewish identity. And he says that his approach has two themes. There are two themes that he brings to every issue that he considers. One, he tries to find agreement and not coercion. And number two, he says, his approach in any issue, every action he takes, is al pi halacha, according to Jewish law. For the first time in the state's history, this portfolio represents religious Zionism, a modern Orthodox perspective. Now, I have no idea if or to what extent he will succeed. But as Kahana himself says, this is a one-time opportunity. I don't know when there'll ever be another one. We can't let the extremists of both sides, the Haredim on one side, the ultra-secularists on the other side, we cannot let the extremists on both sides determine how the majority wants to live. And the majority wants to live in mutual respect. The majority wants Shabbat to have a special nature in the state of Israel. And the majority wants maximal freedom in its way of life. Within private issues, within personal issues, let people decide. Don't coerce. The Ministry of Religious Affairs should be involved only in public policy. I am very deeply drawn to these words. They reflect my feelings very, very precisely. And all I can say is, member of Knesset, Matan Kahana, Hatzlacha Rabbah, may you find great success. And we will be watching very carefully and very hopefully. My friends, thank you very much for joining. I want to wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing all of you soon in person.